My name is Nick Bicanic. The C is the ch sound. I'm Croatian, and although I'm wearing a Mettle t-shirt, I don't actually work for Mettle, but I do use their software a lot, as do a number of the filmmakers that are on this board. So there's a lot of talks coming up. There have been a lot of talks already over the next few days. I'm going to be talking about, well, it says I'm going to be talking about storytelling in 360 VR, creating VR experiences. What it actually means is I'm going to be talking about editing, because I think editing is a key component of VR storytelling, and I'm going to explain why. So, before I get into that, the company's called Revolver. That's RVLVR, Revolver without the vowels, because apparently somebody told me it was cool to not have vowels in a tech company. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but either way, I thought it was funny. So, first things first. How many people here can have a quick show of hands? Who's filmed anything with a 360 camera before? So not a huge amount of people. Oh, well, Fabian, you filmed like 20 things, so you should go just stand over there in the back. But yes, there's not that many people, so I'll talk about some basics, and then we'll see where we go from there. So no matter what, when you're working in 360, you're going to be working with a special new type of camera. You could be working with an array of standard GoPros, you could be working with an array of modified GoPros, which are those over there. This is a Jaunt, a fancy camera, which used to be a bunch of GoPros, but now is a little bit cleverer. It does its stitching in the cloud. This is a mini-eye, very similar to one of these cameras over here. It's an array of Blackmagics. This is a Spheric-Cam, which is not yet out, but will be very soon. It's about the size of a baseball. There's a stand, about 3 or 4 stands over there. Jeff and his guys have put that together. This is a Nokia Ozo, stands just over there. But here's the thing, no matter what you shoot with, and no matter how you do it, when you try to tell a story, you're going to have to figure out how to edit this story, because if you don't edit, you can't move the narrative forwards. To be clear, of course you can have a static shot which fades to black and then fades up to another static shot, but if you do that, you're severely limiting the way in which you're telling these stories. So, before I jump to the next slide, I'm just going to mention one thing which is important for me to contextualize. For almost 100 years, there has been a sense of a screen and an audience. So you guys are the audience, you're watching me perform. It doesn't matter whether I'm on theater, on stage, or whether I am a TV screen, or whether I am a movie theater. The point is there's been a separation between the audience and the story, and there's been a sense of a frame. So that changes the moment you put a head-mounted display on. That changes for VR and it changes for AR. In many ways, while this is actually a different discussion point, VR is a speed bump. Like all of the stuff we're doing right now is a speed bump on the way to AR and augmented reality, but the rules and the techniques and the tools apply. So what I've been trying to do, and I've been spending a lot of time on, is figuring out how to tell stories in a frameless environment. So if you heard Sarah speak before, she talks about the fact that there is still a frame, but it's moving. That's really, we're talking about the same thing, it's just a slight difference of nomenclature. So I talk about this as a frameless environment because the audience is part of the way in which the story is told. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term UX. UX is user experience. Traditionally, in cinema and storytelling, UX has been about the way in which you get to the story. In VR, the UX is the story, which means that the way in which you edit, the way in which you anticipate the viewers are consuming your material is vital. So, let's talk about what this is. You've been seeing this on various different screens in various different ways. You may have seen this on YouTube, you may have seen this on the web. This is what a 360 scene looks like when you film in all directions. Now, as it happens, this is my apartment in Venice, in LA. The camera happens to be in the middle of the apartment and it's looking all the way around. It doesn't look like that, but once you start getting used to this, you realize that it's quite distorted. You know, this is a straight line of a ceiling, doesn't look like a straight line. This happens when you film, no matter what camera you film with, eventually, when you finish, you get a so-called stitched equirectangular video frame. This happens to be 4096 pixel by 2048, but whatever it is, it's going to look something like this. So, in order to do anything useful with this, before you even get to editing, you have to do things like, this is a transformation of an equirectangular frame to a cube map. If I flip between them, you'll notice that it's the same material, but suddenly it looks way less distorted. Straight lines are straight, and what this cube map is imagine again, the camera is sitting in the middle. This is actually the camera right now. This is the bottom of the cube. If you fold this up, it's as though you're standing in the middle of a cube and you can look around. So the reason that's important is that unless you have tools which allow you to seamlessly transform between equirectangular and cube map, you can't do shit. Sorry, I'm not allowed to cuss, I've been told off. So, you can't do very much with your material. So whether or not you're doing rig removal or whether or not you're trying to figure out how to add artificial objects into the space, whether or not you're adding titles, it doesn't matter. The point is equirectangular does you no good. It's the only thing that all the software can understand unless you have magic tools like Mettle's tools. So Skybox is a suite of tools that allows you to do a bunch of different things. At its most basic level, it allows you to do transformation like this so you can work with it. So let's talk about what is this? Well, guess what? That whole 360 frame that you saw before that's really distorted, you can't see it. Because not only can you not look, if you think about it right now, how much can your eyes see? Your eyes can see approximately 170 degrees. They can only focus on a very small area, but they can see 170. Ironically, your ears can hear everything, which is fascinating, which is why sound is such an important part of storytelling. But 360 degrees is what this entire frame is. The clear box is about 100 degrees. Some modern headsets, like say the Oculus Rift or the PlayStation VR or the HTC Vive, they show you approximately 100 degrees. It varies plus or minus 5, but basically you're 100 degrees. So your field of view inside your VR frame is about 100 degrees. However, you can't pay attention to your entire field of view. Just like, for example, you can't see me and see the person standing over there at the same time for real. You can't do that in VR. So, in addition to field of view, let me define another piece of vocabulary which I like to use, which is the arc of attention. I consider the arc of attention to be approximately 25 degrees. And in short, if you're going to take one thing away from this talk, as far as I'm concerned, in order for a cut to work, there needs to be an emotional or a visual anchor within the arc of attention across the cut. So what that means is, let's say I've got a headset on right now and I'm looking at something happening over here. If you cut, so long as the thing that's happening over here at the moment I'm looking at it has something in common with the thing that's happening over here after the cut, you're good. So, what does that mean here? So here's an example. This, in traditional filmmaking, would basically be a push-in. So it's a jump cut to a slightly different focal length. Yeah, guess what? We don't have focal lengths in 360. What we have is a rig of wide-angle lenses that we have to move around in different ways. So what this means is that I'm showing you here, these are a set of tools and visual vocabulary that I've developed in order to try and help me tell stories, help me edit, and help me educate other people as to how I think this could work. So, this is an example of one cut. This is before the cut, this is after the cut. You can see that the girl, who by the way has just slammed the door in this particular story, the girl hasn't really moved. She's within the arc of attention. So again, so long as the person is looking at that, this is going to work. Now, I'm going to ask the question that a lot of you might be asking. This is very clever, Nick, but how are you going to guarantee that the person is looking at that very moment, at that very place? Because what if they're looking like this at the corner of the pedestal as opposed to looking at the girl who just slammed the door? Well, if they're looking at the side of the pedestal, only two things have happened. One is they're a VR 360 professional that looks around and sees where all the stitch lines are and is trying to figure out what went wrong. And two, I've entirely failed as a storyteller. Because if I can't retain your attention to a certain area of the scene, either using movement or dialogue or performance or other kinds of cues, for example audio, I'm screwed, because that means I failed to be able to enchant you sufficiently to be able to pay attention to my story. So I'm going to do two more quick examples, which is, here's another cut. By the way, sorry, this entire video clip as well as an article that describes this, as well as all these screens, are available. There's a link at the end of this show. Let's see, so this is before the cut, after the cut. Now this is a reverse, so if you look, what's happening here, these two people are talking. She has just addressed him. In fact, in the scene, she's actually yelled at him about something. And what I'm doing is I'm reversing to what's kind of like an over-the-shoulder shot. In reality, the 360 camera has moved. In this shot, it's kind of behind this table next to my dining table. And in the next shot, it's behind the sofa. But what actually happens emotionally is you're feeling his point of view. Now again, there are many people who would argue, many traditionalists in 360 filmmaking, that, oh no, you can't do this, you know, you have to take like 15 to 20 seconds at least between these cuts. You can't cut aggressively, you can't cut to coverage. I don't believe that, and I think that one of the interesting things with these tests, oh, just to be clear, by the way, this was done as a test. It was shot in 1 hour. It was shot prior to Sundance, mostly because I was angry with the fact that not enough people were pushing editing forward as in the 360 medium, and frankly, because I'd just gotten to grips with some of the Skybox tools that allowed me to do this, which I'll get to in a second. So, I think there's one more cut here that I demonstrate, which is this is before the cut. And again, this is your field of view, this is your arc of attention, because I'm assuming that if the girl is scantily clad and she's interacting with the guy, hopefully you're looking vaguely in that direction. Otherwise, again, I failed as a storyteller. So, this is the reverse. So now you don't know it's the girl, but hopefully you have an idea that at this point in the scene, you're familiar enough with the environment that if I cut to a hard reverse, that you're not lost. Again, if you are lost, I failed. So by the way, it's interesting that in this particular article that this links to, there are 2 cuts that failed, and I left them in there because I wanted to illustrate how this fails and why I think it fails, and it talks all about that. So here's an interesting point. So when you stitch your stuff, those of you who've never done this before may not realize this, but you bring all this stuff in together and you've got this 360 sphere of images. You have to pick a 0 point. You have to pick a default point for what people will look at if you don't adjust the footage at all. And when you pick that point, you may guess wrong. In fact, it's highly likely that you will guess wrong. However, when you're editing, you will notice, remember that I talked about this whole arc of attention, you notice that you have to slide your footage around, and you have to slide your footage around in order for these cuts to match. And without being able to do that, it's a complete nightmare to work in this space, because you have to go back to your stitching program, re-render with a different 0, and then try and make a cut. Well, that ended about a couple of months ago when Chris and his team released an addition to the Skybox toolset, which was a sphere rotation component. So basically the sphere rotation component allows me to seamlessly move my sphere in any particular direction. So it's as though I'd gone back to the stitching program, I'd not restitched, but I'd re-rendered the entire output, which you don't have to do. So I think that's pretty much it as far as what I was going to talk about. This, by the way, is the link. It's bit.ly/edit360. It's an article that talks about all of this in a bit more detail with the YouTube clip that was a shot of this. For those of you who do go and check this out, this was never stitched. I just did a quick stitch. I didn't want to make this perfect. I did this as a demo. I was trying to focus on how do you tell stories and how do you cut. In particular, how do you cut? Because I thought that was a vital way of pushing narrative forwards and compressing time. I think that's about it. If anyone has any questions, I'd love to hear them because I tend to be fairly opinionated on all matters, so I'm happy to answer them. Anyone? No? No?
Question for you.
Let's go.
About being more aggressive with the cuts and not being so precious with the material.
Yeah.
Like, how are you making those determinations when you want someone to explore, not explore the scene?
So it's a very interesting question. Just to repeat it for those who didn't hear it, the question was, if you're going to be more aggressive with the material and you're going to cut more aggressively, how do you determine whether or not you want somebody to explore a scene or not? So if you don't mind, I'll reframe your question slightly. And I've often been asked, most recently actually by the New York Times, when we were talking about, I just recently filmed in Cuba. We filmed the Obama visit and the baseball game and the Rolling Stones concert. It was kind of an amazing experience. But the New York Times asked us about a different project. They said, why would you do this in 360? This doesn't sound like a 360 project. And it's an interesting, it's another way of asking a question, which is, for example, right now, actually maybe right now is not a good example. If you walk into anybody's living room and there's something happening, doesn't matter whether it's 2 people or 3 people or 5 people, the chances of activity happening all around you is fairly small. That doesn't tend to happen that way in life. If you walk into a restaurant, you walk into a retail environment, you walk into a bar, you're walking to a particular direction because you have a purpose there's an intent in what you're trying to do, and the intent has to have a direction. Very, very few people walk into a space and go like this. In fact, the only ones that do are probably Jason Bourne and James Bond because they're looking for bugs anywhere in the walls. So the answer, I'm not trying to make fun of your question at all. I think it's actually a very important question, is when do people want to look around? There's a temptation amongst a lot of 360 filmmakers to stage 360 in every possible direction. In other words, they'll stick the camera here and then they'll go, let's put a dancer over here, and then let's put like a dude painting a wall over here, and let's put like a kid fixing a bike over here and a chick in a bikini. And you watch this stuff and you go, this is kind of annoying, because what am I supposed to look at and what's this even about? So I worry about I generally worry about trying to force 360 in general, so I tend to think more about, I want people to feel. And the way I want to make them feel is I want to tell them a story with characters and with plot. Or in the case of a documentary, I want to document a moment and allow them to experience the moment. So if that moment is an incredibly beautiful sunset and I'm in a, I don't know, here's an example. I was shooting in Haiti with Maria Bello at a place called Bassin Bleu, which means Blue Lagoon. For those of you who haven't been there, it's essentially a cave-like environment with beautiful blue water and 2 waterfalls. And it's so amazing that, and it's all around you. So in an environment like that, for sure, I'd go, well, people are going to be in awe, so they'll want to look around. But in an environment when I've got a specific thing, I've got 2 characters that I want something to happen to, I want to move it forwards, frankly, I could care less about the rest of the space. But I'll give you one extra point, which I think is important. If you think about how human beings are built physiologically, their necks and their shoulders don't articulate very well in 360, especially if you're sitting on a sofa. So if you imagine, how are people going to be consuming this material coming down the line? I mean, you guys are all super early adopters. You're way ahead of the curve. A lot of people have vaguely heard of 360, but they're not actually trying to make it. If you think about how this works, yes, if you sit in a spinny chair, like one of those over there right behind us, at a VR film festival, yes, you're going to be spinning around, but there is, I'll bet money, or whoever wants to take this bet, that there is 0 chance that people are going to be changing their relaxed at home viewing habits just because of 360. What's going to happen instead is they're going to sit on their sofa because they're kind of lazy and they're chilling out and they're pop up in the beer and they'll watch their 360 experience. And when they do that, they'll go, wow, this is really awesome. And they'll be looking at the front 180 degrees. And sure, if something amazing happens over here, if a tiger growls, they'll be like, holy shit, what was that? And they'll look over, and then they'll look right back again. So it's a very long-winded way of saying there's a space for 360 in general, but for me, it's more, in most cases, especially narrative cases, it's more about context rather than content. So 360 is a context within which I want my content to live. Very long answer, sorry, but it was a good question.
Do you ever shift the arc of tension in a shot, or do you always?
It's a good question. So the question, for those who didn't hear it, is, do I ever shift the arc of attention? Yes, I do. But I do it on the basis of, for example, the content that's happening. So in one of the cases of the sample shots, if you look at this URL, you'll see that the girl walks across from the front door to the table. And when she does that, because she's talking, I'm quote-unquote hoping/assuming you're looking at her. And when that happens, I'm allowing the arc of attention to shift. The arc of attention is not a hard and fast rule. It's something that I made up when I tried to work out why do certain cuts jar and why do certain cuts not. And by the way, this is, I'm totally liberally stealing from editing and cinematic history. The idea of doing match cuts and cuts on action is a totally well-known phenomenon. The addition of the rotation is what's new. So yes, absolutely, the arc of attention can shift within the field of view, or the entire field of view can shift, depending on what's actually happening. Yes, I do. So for example, one of the things that happens, the question was, do I ever try to bring it back? Because I believe that the most comfortable position is forwards, what I'm trying to do is, I try to bring it back, so I will actually try and rotate a shot, if I can, through 3 or 4 cuts. I'll try and rotate a shot so I'm back to normal, which is one of the reasons why on the to-do list for Mr. Bobotis's tools is something that I refer to as a ripple rotation, because as an editor, when I fix something, I want the rest of the rotations to match. It's a much more complicated thing, and I won't go into it now, but yes, absolutely. Walking people around in terms of across cuts and with the arc of attention is something that's quite important for a storyteller, but it's a little nuanced. The bottom line is that I think editing is possible, and I absolutely think that it's, there is actually some other tools that you'll find that do edits in various different ways, which are really cool and new. That's the thing, this whole industry is cool and new, so it's all about who cares about what the rules are. Try it. If it works, that's awesome. If it doesn't work, don't do it again. And that's kind of the rule that I've been applying through most of what I've been doing. Anyone? Oh, there's one more. Kevin.
Are you using traditional tools to board your shots, or to plan for what you put into this, or are you using any new tools that some of us can benefit from?
So the question, I don't need to repeat it, but what am I using to storyboard shots? Well, in this particular case, I didn't storyboard shit. I just put the camera in there and I said, we got an hour to do this before I fly to Sundance. Say again? Oh, Chris can help. But yes, so there are definitely certain ways you can storyboard.
So one of the speakers coming in the next little while is a guy by the name of Lewis Smithingham, and he was involved in the Doug Lyman production, Invisible. So I was working with Lewis, and at one point he reaches out to me and he says, we're getting boards. We're getting scripted boards. And I'm like, wonderful. And I'm thinking I'm going to see these flat storyboards. Much to my surprise, I get cubic cross storyboards. So every single view is being accounted for. So right there, and I mean, that's not me making it up, that's necessity, right? So you can't depend on linear storyboards anymore. You got to make everything up all over again. So there's your board list.
One of the things that is very interesting, by the way, for those of you who are interested in scripted material, is what happens to actors and performances when you put 360 cameras around them. Because you see, when experienced actors act towards the camera. So for example, say that camera right over there that's recording this. An experienced actor, obviously they don't buzz it. If they buzz it, then they're breaking the fourth wall. That's a bad idea unless you're an Adam Sandler comedy. So an experienced actor knows exactly where the camera is and knows when they do a hair toss or whatever activity they do, they're acting to the camera. When you take that away from it, it freaks them out initially, but it also liberates them so long as they can dial it down. So much in the same way, say a theater performer has to project to the audience because they're in the back row. But when you dial that down to TV, it gets a little more intimate. When you go back into VR, it gets even more intimate. So a crappy performance becomes really crappy in VR, which is sadly one of the reasons why, if you look at a lot of scripted narrative that's been done so far, it's been kind of junk. It's been kind of junk because people are working with primitive tools. It's also been kind of junk because it's bad performances. And a bad performance gets massively amplified when you increase the intimacy. So yes, it's the same rules as always before. Good performances, good writing, and creative thinking as to how you're going to be editing. I think I'm probably out of time, but if I can keep going. Oh, there's no one after me, so if anyone has any other questions, I'll just rant some more. No one wants to know anything at all. Tobias, do you have any questions? That'll be a no. No, sorry, I'm teasing. Tobias is actually a visionary genius dude who built this and building a bunch of other things he's talking tomorrow. You have a question? Go for it, yeah.
Do you ever change the field of view between cuts, like 90 degrees and you go up to 10 degrees, for example?
Oh, so it's an interesting question. The question is, do I change the field of view between cuts? Unfortunately, I can't really do that. The field of view is a physical constraint imposed by the methods by which this is being observed. It's not something that I get to pick. So if you're asking, would I like to be able to punch in? Absolutely. Do the tools for that exist? Well, ish. There's tools that are actually coming down the pipe with Skybox that allow for something called the Mobius transformation, which will allow you to zoom in. The problem is that even if you did, the resolution of the footage is not yet good enough for that to work. So strictly speaking, the way I'm using the term field of view, I can't change it because it's a constraint of these devices. So for example, this little thing over here, this is an Oculus CV1. CV stands for consumer version, and this thing has a limited field of view of about 100 degrees just due to the physical nature of how it's constructed. So if you feed a 360 video into it, you're going to get 100 degrees and that's it. So I can't change it. Right? I'm trying to interpret what you're asking in a different way, and yes, I'd love to, and soon it's coming. I've got another one.
You may have missed this, but to me, since you are shooting 360, you go back to the original filmmakers in the silent film era. They constructed a film of close-ups and wide shots and such. Are we trying to figure out what it is in 360, or are we just applying the old rules to the new technology?
So the question was, there have been 100 years plus of in creation and evolution of cinematic language in traditional filmmaking. In other words, where there is a constrained frame and the language has included montage and mise-en-scène and tons of other things. And the question is, Are we just blindly copying, well, you didn't say blindly, to be fair. Are we copying what's gone before and trying to fit a square peg in a round hole? Or are we trying to invent our own? I think the answer is a little bit of both, in the sense that inevitably when people first start doing stuff in a new medium, for example, the first I'm trying to think, the first TV was essentially filmed theater, because they didn't know what else to do. They didn't really have the ideas of camera movement. They didn't have the blocking. They didn't have the staging. So there are aspects of what I'm doing that to me remind me directly of stuff that was designed not for this. But there are other aspects of things that come from, I have a slightly unusual background. I spent the last 5 years building mobile apps, and I've worked on a lot of different interactive installations. I've worked on video games, so I'm unusual in the sense that I'm both the traditional filmmaker and the technologist. So not only do I think that the language here comes from quote-unquote camera movement and cutting, but it also comes from allowing a certain element of control to the person who's consuming the media. So for example, the person consuming the media right now can only look around. But pretty soon you could have gaze-driven narratives. For example, a dog barks behind me. Okay, I could turn to look at the dog, I could not turn to look at the dog. But what happens if when I turn to look at the dog, something else happens? E.g., I see the dog running away. In video games, this stuff is a no-brainer, because in video games you're rendering all this information on the fly. So in video games, if I don't pick up the gun, I don't pick up the gun. If I do pick up the gun, I can shoot something. In 360 video, much harder, because not impossible, just much harder. But the idea of doing branch narrative and interactive narrative, that's something I spent over a decade thinking about, and for sure that slightly slightly blurs the definition of what you're asking about as far as cinematic language is concerned, but it absolutely does not blur what I'm talking about, which is the emotional state of the person who's consuming it. Here's the thing that sucks about video games and interactivity for me, and I speak this as someone who's played a lot of them. They don't make me feel. I've cried in movies tons of times. I don't mind admitting that, but I've never cried in a video game. I don't engage with video games that way, and one of the reasons I think is because I have full agency. Because I have full control, I don't get as emotionally lost. Whereas, much like a piece of music, a movie emotionally engages me in a different way. So we're all looking for ways in which we can make an audience connect and make an audience feel. And frankly, it doesn't matter whether it's journalism or documentary or pure entertainment or horror or I mean, I hate to say it, but porn. It's not something that I would ever be interested in making, but it's a key part of what makes certain technologies move forward. And all of these things are sort of floundering around going, oh my God, $6 billion has been spent on platform and hardware in quote-unquote VR, and compared to the little on content, what the hell are these people going to watch? Like, what are people going to watch when they buy their PlayStation VRs and they sit and are they going to watch just a bunch of stuff that has been made so far in 360 video? Well, hopefully not. It's kind of boring. They're basically narrated slideshows. We've got to be able to do better than that. Clearly we can do better than that because Hollywood keeps pumping, well fine, a lot of stuff Hollywood pumps out as junk, but every now and again we get a Mad Max. I hope you guys like it. If you don't, then maybe we just agree to disagree. But yeah, we can pump out really good stuff every now and again, but how do we get to that level of drama and emotional intention? It's basically going to take existing professionals either relearning stuff, learning it from scratch, or new guys coming up. So I'm banking on the new guys because I'm one of them. We'll see if I'm right or wrong in the next few years. That's about it, I think. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks a lot, Nick. I think that Nick is going to stick around for a little while. If anyone has some one-on-one questions for him and you want an opinionated answer,